you guys, I think of course you should be able to give both sides of the story in that context.
Yeah,
but for goodness
agree,
sake, get the information right. Chippy's got the worst of both, but also the journalist already had the public sympathy on her side because we all know someone with a heartbreaking story, or we've experienced that with MB.
There's another thing, and maybe it's just the generation that I was born into, but when I was growing up, the rule was women and children first, and pregnant women ahead of everybody.
There's your broadcasting standards.
And,
supporting gender roles, disgusting, Chris, disgusting.
Sleep at night.
With tales of the Titanic, Jordan, where gentlemen from first
That's an
class,
old-fashioned term, Damien.
right, gave up their places in the lifeboats to the bearers of the next generation. This is old school, I know, breaches all the rules of political correctness, but this was the moral imperative, right? Women and children first, and pregnant women ahead of everyone.
I get the feeling that she should have, while she was on the line to MIQ, rung up Clark Gayford and just put him on speakerphone. He would have given her the wrong advice, but it would have been good. Quick round. When do we hit 1,000 cases in a day, Jordan?
I reckon next weekend now.
Chris?
Yeah, I think maybe next weekend.
Damien?
If the curve is in fact exponential.
Valentine's Day.
We have to move on, comrades. Issue 2, the latest TVNZ and Roy Morgan polls are out, and despite terrible COVID times, a housing crisis, inequality and meaningless climate change legislation, Labour is still at 40%. Jordan, what does the right have to do to stop Kiwis loving Jacinda for saving them from COVID?
I think I'm quite able to say that I've been thinking about this a lot over summer because it depresses me. And that is that what we're seeing in our, you may be aware the Taxpayers Union now commissions its own polling.
It's a great poll.
But,
great organisation.
Thank you, Damien. Keep
funding it. Yeah.
One of the questions we ask is that favourable, unfavourable question where the pollsters get the person to say, out of 5, 1 being very unfavourable and 5 being very favourable, where do you rate this person? And the proportion of 5s and 1s is increasing, meaning people are saying about Jacinda Ardern and the leaders that they find them very favourable or very unfavourable as opposed to the 2s, 3s and 4s.
Right.
And what that tells me, and I will freely admit, it worries me because organisations like mine will be the first to be blamed for increased polarisation, but we see it on our own social media channels that people are just more charged up in a way that really saddens me because it's what I see in the US and Australia, and that I've always been proud of, that you can be a hard-hitting political organisation but fun, not nasty. And in the current environment, that just gets harder. So, the movement isn't actually that large. Of course, there's a bit of drama between ACT and National.
But the polarisation you're saying is becoming way different.
Because of course, for people, in the organisations I'm involved with, we're always striving to focus it. Of course, we're funded by the tail of the normal distribution, the people like me and Damien, or on the other side, you two.
The extreme crazies.
But the great thing about New Zealand is the rump is in the middle, and we always want to be talking to them. But as that becomes lower and people get pushed to the sides, that's what's been keeping me up over summer.
Are we saying that the fives, the people who think very highly of the Prime Minister, that number itself has been going up? Because that would be, I wouldn't be surprised if the 1s have been going up because you expect some degree of disenfranchisement over time. But you're saying that the 1s, the people who give Jacinda a 5 out of 5 is also going up.
As a proportion of the favourables and unfavourables, the varies are going up.
Because it is interesting, you notice on social media that there is an element of deranged anti-vaxxers and other fringe groups who seem to have a pathological and deranged hatred for the Prime Minister, which is, I think, unhelpful and quite disturbing. You can disagree with somebody's politics. You can even get angry about the politics, But I am noticing, and it's quite ugly, some of the intensity of the animosity that's been springing up, and it's pretty ugly. I don't like
Screened at. So I'm very pro-vax. I jumped the queue to go and get my vax early. I'm right. Can you get someone more pro-vax? But I'm starting to get very uncomfortable with the sort of mandate and where that's taking society.
Yeah.
And if you were first suspicious, concerned about the vax, and all you were being at is yelled at by every single thing you open your phone to look at every political quarter, of course that's going to drive you to
You're going to get radicalised.
Follow-up question, Jordan. Data done by David Farrar for the Taxpayers Union showed a phenomenal support for ACT in Auckland amongst young men. How likely is it you'll get an MMP overhang for males in Auckland who will electorate vote National and party vote ACT? Because I think that's what's happening in the Roy Morgan polls. You're seeing that reflection there.
Well, firstly, as David would always point out when we find these little gems in the polling, is you've got to combine a couple of polls because you're talking small sample sizes. I think, Bomber, though, we need to get you signed up to what we call the Taxpayer Caucus, which is our club of major donors.
That sounds like a bad idea.
You can get the full polling report, and I'm not going to name them. I'm not going to name them, but there may or may not be a political commentator that rhymes with Shootin, who I think signed up to the caucus just to receive that polling. And I thought for the $100 a month that costs, what a damn good deal.
Chris, there is a deep criticism regarding the lack of progress on domestic issues, but there is a genuine belief that if the right had been in charge, we would have had far more death and misery. How long can that perception excuse Labour for politically treading water?
Well, I think the government would not be the government without COVID. I think that had COVID not arrived, had COVID not existed, the 2020 election would have been won by Simon Bridges and the National Party.
Right.
And the reason for that is very simple. It's because an absolute contradiction to the example set by Helen Clark, an example which netted her 9 years in office, and that example was under-promise and over-deliver. Jacinda Ardern over-promised and didn't deliver anything. And that was beginning to dawn on the electorate, and that is why Simon Bridges was ahead. National was ahead in that poll before COVID struck.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been all downhill from there, and it would have been a one-term government. Now, the only thing that saved it was COVID.
Right.
And as I said earlier, she has this preternatural quality in a crisis, not only to strobe, I'm not going to say competence, but a lack of fear, a sense of calm, and that wonderful empathic quality that she has of making people feel that she understands where they are, and also that she is going to do the right thing. Now, there are plenty of people, I think that person whose name rhymes with Shootin has written about this himself. If she hadn't been strong-armed, she would have let that memorial service in Christchurch go ahead. Which would have become the super spreader event.
That's right.
To end all super spreader events. And it was only, I think, the combined pressure of a lot of important people who said, no, don't, you need to shut the country down right now. But just to wind that point up, she's great at that. When there is no script, when there is no rule book, Jacinda is at her best. But when we are out of crisis and the rule book that is presented to her, at least by her officials, is the only book on the table, she's absolutely hopeless because she's got no resources, it seems to me, to challenge official advice.
Right.
And very few of them do, to be honest.
Yeah.
And so, because our public service works on the principle that the less governments do, the better, and it's worked on that principle since the 1980s, then the advice that a Labour government or a Labour New Zealand First government gets is always going to be absolutely contrary to its best interests. But if you've got a whole bunch of former student politicians who have never really been interested in political philosophy and don't really have any hard and fast ideas about how they want,
they will get pushed around by those public bureaucrats, right?
You're not getting invited to many Labour Party parties anymore, Chris, with those sorts
I haven't been invited
for some time, I assure you.
Since Grant Robertson invited me to a dinner during a conference because he wanted to get me on side, but then made the mistake of boasting about it to Bryce Edwards, who told me, which rather defeated the purpose, I'm afraid.
If I was standing for leader of Labour, I'd invite you too.
But you used to be on the board of the Labour Party back in the day.
My friend, I am old enough to have been on the New Zealand Council of the Labour Party. When political parties were democratic organisations, not poor facsimiles of corporations.
Follow-up question, Chris. At Nationals Retreat, Luxon told his MPs not to be elitist pricks in the most elitist prick city in New Zealand, Queenstown. It's like his entry as leader when he hired a black Mercedes to cross the road to Parliament. Luxon can't help but highlight his wealth and privilege because Jesus loves him. Will rehash tax cuts, more Arangatamariki welfare experiments and faux crocodile tears about the poor be enough to win in 2023?
Well, it was more than enough.
For John Key. Damien, act on 18.5.
Can I just found this? I don't know if this is true. I haven't gone to check, but there was a story from Thomas Coughlin that said that, and I lost my lunch over this, but Chris Luxon gave a copy of Mass Rashbrook's book.
Yes. To Simon Bridges.
Right. And according to Coughlin, Bridges quite liked it. I'm sitting there thinking, no, he did not, but fine, whatever. But the point was, now I haven't drilled down on this. I'm only going what Thomas Coughlin said in the media story, so he may have the wrong end of the stick. But that's what it said in the New Zealand Herald, and we know the New Zealand Herald don't get it right. But it was really interesting. We have to get Max on. I think it'll be an excellent debate.
Damien, act on 18.5%. Shouldn't the Greens be ashamed?
Why?
Because the ACT Party are the third largest political party in the country, and the Greens are gone.
They've been for ages.
I mean, no, that's like saying ACT should be ashamed because Labour's on 40%. No, I think the Greens value purity more than anything else. I mean, these are the perpetual 40-year-old versions in a political sense. They don't want to be tainted by anything that may even come anywhere close to implementing any of their agendas. They don't believe in compromise. A lot of them don't appear to believe in personal hygiene. So I can see absolutely no reason why they would be in any way concerned at being at 8.5% or care what ACT has done. In fact, ACT have been at 18.5%, which I think is an inflated number, but ACT being at that number just proves to the Greens how important it is that they maintain ideological purity, because if the Greens were at 18%, it would only indicate to themselves that they had some way sold out and disgraced the memory of Christine Delahunty.
Follow-up question. Luxon says National needs to have a hard conversation about Māori. Is this a recognition that National needs the Māori Party in 2023? Is he laying the ground, as Key did, to bring them into the fold? Because it's amazing political camouflage if he can.
I don't. And this way, I feel a bit like the Greens. You know, I don't want to have to try to get into my head to understand what Chris Luxon is thinking, because the mere fact that he is reading Max Rashbrook's book
that makes me laugh.
Just even contemplating Chris's worldview stresses me out. He can wine and dine, but I don't think he's going to seduce the Maori Party. I think they have learnt a bitter lesson from Dancing with John Key. I think, actually, that the Maori Party can be very proud of the achievements that they got from liaising with the Key administration. And I think that they got a lot of runs on the board.
Declaration.
Quick round to everyone. While talking about the poor, Luxon stayed at a 5-star hotel. What kind of hotel would Jesus have stayed in? Jordan.
I think it'd be an Airbnb man, wouldn't it?
Chris.
Stable.
Yeah, exactly.
Damien?
Wasn't there a story about this?
Damien.
He would have stayed in an MIQ hotel and he would not have left.
Comrades, we must move on to issue 3. Inflation came out last week at 5.9%. Banks were predicting 1.6%. We got 1.4%. Damien, why isn't Adrian Orr doing a victory dance?
Well, Adrian Orr doesn't seem to like to talk to the media at all.
He doesn't like you. Doesn't like you much.
Well,
doesn't like you at all.
I mean, come on, Adrian. Look, he should come on the show.
We keep inviting him on. We keep inviting he goes, but I hate Damien Grant. Join the club.
Yeah, so lots of people, Adrian. Come on. But Adrian should be doing a victory dance because if you have a look, the numbers last time around were 2.2% for 90 days. And I said here last week that if the number came out at less than 2.2%, that would indicate that the rate of inflation was actually going down.
So you're saying it's transitory?
So if I was Adrian Orr, I would be saying it's transitory. If I was Adrian Orr, I would be out there on the front steps of number 2, the terrace, and I would be saying, listen, you shouldn't look at how far we've come in the last year. Look at how fast we're going now. We did 1.4% in this quarter.
Still over twice your target.
Yeah, but you have a look. Look,
slightly less, slightly lighter shade of
the proverbial. You play the card that you dealt with, and if Adrian Orr wasn't such. I won't say it, but if Adrian Orr had the ability to go out there and front the media in the way that Don Brash went out there in front of me, because Don Brash, with his presentations, did a lot to break inflationary expectations. Adrian Orr can.
Adrian's no Don Brash, though. Let's be frank.
No,
he's more political.
He's not. But if Adrian Orr went out there and says, yeah, look, 1.4 is not great. Right, but you look, we went from 2.2 to 1.4. The trend is really clear. And Adrian Orr come out there and says, listen, the 2.2. So the reason we're at 5.9 is because we had 2.2. It's almost half of the inflation numbers just in that one quarter. And he can come out there and says, listen, that it shows that it's transitory. It shows it's a result of supply constraints. It shows that it's the effect of quantitative easing, which is now ended. And so Adrian Orr, by using a bully pulpit, could actually do something to reduce inflationary expectations.
Okay, well, hold on. Follow-up question. The International Monetary Fund has sharply cut its growth forecast for 2022 with a warning that higher than expected inflation and the Omicron variant have worsened the outlook for the entire global economy. Is the inflation transitory or not? The Fed says it isn't.
No, I don't think inflation is transitory. I think in New Zealand, you print 20% of your GDP in a 6 or 8 month period, you're going to generate inflation. But part of the reason why I think inflation is not transitory is because the inadequacy and the economic illiteracy of a lot of the financial journalists are not getting out there and telling the story that it went from 2.2 to 1.4. There is actual evidence that it is transitory, right? And if Adrian Orr will get out there and would articulate that, because the reason why I don't think it is transitory is because of inflationary expectations, right? I'm dealing with clients, I'm dealing with staff, I'm dealing with people who are sitting there saying, look, inflation is at 6%, so they want a 6% a pay rise, or they want a 6% increase in the products and services they're selling. If Adrian Orr get out there on the front foot and say, no, there was a one-off, and we're back down to 3%, but he can't.
Jordan, what part of dropping 60-odd billion into the economy wasn't seen as inflationary by the government? What part?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, look, I'm a little bit taken by surprise by. I think Damien's been talking too much to the National Party, which I understand are going a bit light on Adrian because they actually want him to be reappointed, which is just so typical Tory. And we're not actually in politics for the good of the nation. We're here to sort of point score or get in, or just power for the sake of it.
Why does National want Adrian?
Well, it's this 3D chess they're playing, what I understand, just bizarre. Anyway, I mean, we just take it as read. Adrian is the personification of the dulling down of the New Zealand professional public sector. So put that as a given. People do not give a huzzah about the percentages you're talking about, Adrian. They care about that right now you go and fill up your car. I'm paying $2 in Auckland for diesel. $2. Now, if you are anywhere in the country, that is hurting, especially in provincial New Zealand, which I think is really interesting around the polling and that sort of breakdown. Inflation is not an economic concept. It is hurting people's back pockets, and that, if I was advising Labor, that would be my flashing red light.
Follow-up question.
That's how you lose it.
Does Adrian Orr have any other choice but to raise interest rates? What's he going to do? He's got to put them up. He's got to put them up, right?
He's got to know, and actually, it's probably going to get even worse because the elephant in the room in the world economy, and we understand it because China's in a similar environment to New Zealand in that going for the elimination strategy, is you ain't seen nothing yet on supply constraints when China is either A, trying to battle Omicron,
right,
or B, letting it in and going through the same thing that New Zealand is going to have to go through over the next 6 to 12 weeks.
Chris, you wrote last week that Bernard Hickey highlighted how Labor's COVID response helped the rich at the expense of the poor. Was that by design?
Well, Bernard seemed to think so. He said it was accidentally on purpose. I mean, I find it very difficult to understand exactly where Bernard Hickey is coming from these days. He seems to want a revolution, but I'm not entirely sure he would like a revolution if one actually occurred. He also seems to think that Labour can be shamed into behaving like a social democratic party. Well,
they've shown pretty immune to that.
And it's all bad. Yeah, back in those days when I sat on the New Zealand Council of the Labour Party, there were quite a number of us who were trying to fight the neoliberal revolution or counter-revolution, depending on whose columns you read. And it was a losing game, and the people who remained in the Labour Party gave up the game and adapted themselves to the new reality, just as poor old Jim Bolger did. Promised a decent society and gave us Ruth Richardson instead.
That was decent. What are you talking about?
Easy, Damien. Easy.
Ruth's back in the news.
She's found a good home.
I'm just staggered that Bernard is staggered that the Labour Party turned out to be a neoliberal party and hasn't helped the poor.
Extraordinary. Follow-up question. You also wrote last week, Chris, in another column that jacking up interest rates will crash the economy. Who will Adrian smite? Property speculators or beneficiaries in the working poor?
Well, he has no choice, as Damien just said, but to raise interest rates and probably raise them rather aggressively. That will work, but we've seen this movie before, and when you jack up the interest rates, as I think his name was Volcker did way back in the late 70s, you crash the economy. You induce a recession. That is the point of putting up the interest rates, of course, because the exuberant spirits of the marketplace need to be doused with cold water. That's what it does.
But here's the thing that's different from Paul Volcker's and Don Brash's day, is that at the moment the number of people who are economically sensitive to interest rates are smaller than what they were 30 years ago. So a 1% or 2% increase in interest rates is going to smash very hard a relatively, 5-10% of the population who have taken out mortgages in the last 3 to 4 years. They're going to get smashed. And there's an awful lot of people like me who just, I don't care. And so to get the same bang for the buck, you are going, so let's say you want to drop, say, 2% of economic activity, you are going to get all of that 2% from 5 or 10% of the population, whereas back when Brash and Volcker were doing it, you would spread that over about half the population. It's going to get really ugly.
Quick round, where will inflation be by December, Jordan?
I think it'll be about the same. And my reason is that I think I'm pretty pessimistic about the supply side of the economy internationally. And I think that interest rates will be a lot more, and I agree it's going to be very uneven because there's a heck of a lot of people in their 30s and 40s that have borrowed up to the wazoo to get onto the housing market and are very vulnerable because in my adult lifetime, interest rates have been low.
Chris, where will inflation be by December?
Oh, I'd put it somewhere about 4.5%.
Damien?
I think that 1.4 was an aberration. I think that the underlying inflation rate's
We're talking quarterly, and we're flipping between.
Yeah, I know because we are being misled and lied to by the financial illiteracy of our journalists. But you're talking about. I think the underlying inflation rate is probably about 1.6, 1.7, which is about 5.5% to 6.5% inflation, and I think that's where it's going to be.
I think if you drill into those numbers, you'll see a lot of that was a lot of those financial increases were petrol driven. I think that we're going to see a whole bunch of geopolitical shocks this year, which will cause even more. And I'm saying 10% right now. Let's have easy 10%. It'll be double figures before December. Let's go to Damien Grant and a brief word from our sponsor.
Well, on scary figures like that, I think we're very fortunate to have our sponsor. Our sponsor here on the working group is Gravity Credit Management, and they are a great sponsor. I was over there at the end of last week and talking to the director, Andrew Kingston, and saying, look, why does it work? Why don't they do their own debt collection, and why do they go to third-party debt collectors? And he explained the theory and why they work. There's a couple of reasons. One is simple persistence. If you've got somebody in your office and their job is to collect the $30,000 or $40,000 need to cover the payroll for that week, they're going to focus their time and effort on those debtors who they know will pay. Those guys at 90 and 180 days that have been difficult, your internal staff are not going to spend the time chasing them because it's a waste of their time. When those debts get lodged with a third-party debt collector, the debtors learn very quickly that the calls just don't stop. And the thing with Gravity, they're a very professional organisation. They have banks and finance companies and telecommunication companies and utilities on their books. They colour very much within the lines, but they are very persistent and they're very persistent and effective. Bomber and I would be very appreciative if you've got a business and you've got some debtors out there at the 180-day mark. Get in contact with Gravity, gravitycreditmanagement.co.nz or 0800 Gravity. They would love to hear from you, and we would like you to go there so Bomber and I can continue to put on this show.
Comrades, we must move on to issue 4. After Joe Rogan did some controversial thinking out loud on vaccines, the woke lynch mobs of purification have called for Spotify to be cancelled, with Neil Young and other boomer artists making a stand to leave and get paid more elsewhere. Is this the stand of the righteous against anti-vaxxer madness, or an implemented systemic culture of censorship from easily triggered snowflakes who would cancel the sun for rising on the east as xenophobic? Chris, why is our first response on the left to cancel the debate?
Well, I'm not sure that this is an example of cancel culture, to be honest. Neil Young has always been a rather idiosyncratic artist. He clearly has an issue with Mr. Rogan, and he simply put it to Spotify: you can have Rogan, you can have Young, but you can't have both. And Spotify said, well, that's a perfectly honourable position. It's Rogan.
Goodbye.
Bye now.
And that's fine. It's a private company. The choice is entirely theirs to make. But, I don't think that Neil Young was participating in cancel culture. He was just saying, I can't put up with this guy. I don't want to be in the same, virtual room as this guy, and so if you're going to keep playing this guy or making his podcast available, then I'm out of here. Well, that's fine. But
beyond Neil Young, the cultural move by those, more activist base have gone.
It's going to fail because look at the people who are leaving. They're all older than me, and by God, I'm old enough. So, they're people that I used to love when I was 20 years old, keep me searching for a heart of gold.
Damien, Rogan has 11 million daily viewers. CNN Primetime has barely 500,000. Barely 500,000. Why aren't legacy media asking, why is that?
I think the real question, Bummer, is how can we become the Joe Rogan in New Zealand? How can we cut TV 1 and 3? We want to be there. We want to be the Joe Rogans of New Zealand. I want some of that juice.
I think it's only fair to inject at this point.
Yes.
The small
reality
factoid.
Just a small one. Just a small one.
The small factoid
We're going to need a
that
bigger
Mr.
sponsor.
Rogan has 11 million listeners a month.
A day?
No, it's a month. And CNN has 5.5 million every day. So the CNN boys is slightly bigger than Mr. Rogan.
But is it the same 500,000 though, Chris?
Follow-up question. Damien, there is a difference, is there not, between disinformation and misinformation? One is just being wrong. The other is being malicious. Is Rogan being malicious?
Well, so misinformation and disinformation.
Misinformation is...
So I would be the misinformation and you would be the
disinformation. That's right. You're malicious, I'm just stupid. See, that's the way it works.
So what was the question again?
Jordan, what does this say? I'm just moving on. What does this say about the polarization of debate and politics?
Oh, I think it's a classic illustration. I should note that to the left of me, Chris is technically my boss as a council member of the Free Speech Union, and as the general secretary, I better stick to the union line on this one. I mean, the question, I've been really encouraged by Spotify. I love Spotify. I just think it's literally magic that you can just pick any song in the car and I pay them.
71 million artists.
I just think it's magic. Anyway, even from when I was only a few years ago, it's magic. But I do not trust a corporate in the US, let alone the mob in the US, to choose who I can hear from and who I can't. Now, I've never listened to this guy's podcast. The staff at work say that makes me a bit strange because they've at least heard our episode. He sounds a bit intellectual for me, but that I am glad that Spotify is saying, piddle off.
The Free Speech Union that you helped set up, where do you see it in the hate speech argument this year?
Well, we see the thing is with free speech, it's not just the right to give or the right to the platform, which their opponents would say that it doesn't involve that, but it's the right to receive information, and it's our right to be able to listen to stuff even if we disagree with it and even if it's absolutely cuckoo. And the solution to that is better information. Set up your own podcast. Tune into the working group.
I don't know that would help you become better informed, Jordan, but thank you.
But you take my point though. Like, I want to support, because this is the thing that really scares me with the stuff that NetSafe is doing at the moment with Facebook, and I simply don't trust the government, but nor do I trust the corporate censors that are simply going to take the PR advice and take the easy option, because that begins the march towards groupthink.
Because this is one of the things that I think that the Free Speech Union is so important on, because we think, particularly those with a libertarian bent, that so long as the government's not doing it, it doesn't matter. I don't think that's true. I think free speech is something that inside a corporate organisation, you have those on the woke or whatever, or also sometimes the Christian conservatives who are pushing their agenda. And so corporates have a tendency to respond to that. But I think having an organisation like the Free Speech Union that fronts up and says, actually, no, what you are doing is inconsistent with the principles of free speech. Yes, you're a private organisation, and yes, you can do it, but we're here saying, well, maybe you shouldn't.
Chris, it's a tension that, it's a healthy debate we have in the organisation, that very, and it's a tension libertarians have. I think, though, that, I really like, we have both a Maori and a maxim, a Latin and a Maori maxim that mean very similar meaning. That is, one is let the other side be heard, and the other is listen to the other or the other viewpoint. And that is the fundamental thing, is that we want to support the corporates that stand with the principle of free speech, because the alternate is so much worse.
Comrades, we need to wrap now with a final word. Damien Grant, your rant for 90 seconds. Go to the mountaintop, brother.
My rant, I haven't given too much thought to my rant. I was so interested listening to Jordan. Here's my rant for 90 seconds. My rant is to the National Party. Oh, my goodness gracious me. The wheel of political fortune turns, and the chances are looking very likely that it is going to turn in your direction. We had, under John Key and Bill English, 9 wasted years of political capital. John Key, if you have a look at what he did, it was tragically small. He marginally stopped the growth in the private in the state sector. He sold 49% of some utilities. He had 6 charter schools in the 90-day legislation only because the ACT Party bullied him into it. If you are going to get the levers of power again, and as we believe on Chris Chotter, that is likely to happen, please, please, please do something with it. Do not just be the milquetoast custodians of the welfare state that the last 2 national administrations have been. And if ACT is really at 18%, brother, those are going to be the intellectual backbones to hold this milquetoast administration to its fate.
Jordan, your final word this week.
Yeah, I didn't know there was a rant. So really quickly, that I think that's exactly where the National Party is going, unfortunately, Damien. I'm sad to say it. I think these guys will be quite happy with Chris Luxon, Prime Minister, because it's not about ideas. It seems to be getting into power. Really quickly, rant, this announcement this week that we haven't even mentioned, $14 billion. It's a decade worth of new spending under, if you were looking at Bill English's annual fiscal envelope, on the tram. Sorry, I'm not allowed to say the tram. Light rail out to Mangere. Incredible amount. And what I'm really hopeful for is that we get some good candidates in a healthy competition around this year's local body elections in Auckland, because my lord, is Phil Goff turned out to be just a passenger in that seat.
You're not excited by Richard Hills?
That's so cruel. Don't be like that. Come on. He's on the ground. You don't need to kick him anymore. Chris, your final word this week.
Well, my final word is this, and it's really going to be an acknowledgement of the success of people like Jordan on the right. And I have a very stern warning for the left, and it's this, that the divisions on the left, occasioned by the rise of identity politics, has meant that building mass organisations of the left has become virtually impossible at this point in the 21st century. If anyone were to try, the whole exercise would collapse in on itself as every one of the constituent groups fought with the other, and which is largely what happened with Occupy, bless them, all those years ago. The right, however, because it has a clear objective, because it has an overarching ideological system to which virtually all of its people subscribe to a greater or lesser extent, greater in the case of Damien, lesser in the case of Chris Luxon, I'm sure. But because they have that unifying ideology, and because they can draw together people and build organisations around specific causes and in favour of specific courses of action, they are going to beat the left into a pulp. And the left needs to understand that the inability to come together and build organisations, which they were once, the absolute best at, they have lost that, and they're going to lose just about everything else as a consequence.
Just before we go to Martin's 90-second rant that took over about 7 or 8 minutes, just like to thank Chris for coming on board. If you liked Chris's last little speech there, you can find more of it on his blog at Bolloway Road, WALLEY. And it's some excellent stuff, and I know that because Chris tells me. And also Jordan, thanks for coming on the working group. It's been excellent to have you on here. You've got your own podcast, the Taxpayer Talk, which you can find on all good sites, including Spotify. It's there, and Chris and Jordan are also from the Free Speech Union. That's fsu.org.nz. FSU.nz, and they will be delighted to have you on board. Martin, take it away.
Thank you, comrades. My final word this week. Let me start by acknowledging that Neil Young can take his art to make a stand and a better commercial deal, as is his right. Let me acknowledge I think Joe Rogan is wrong about vaccines. Let me acknowledge that Spotify is a corporate vampire who pays its artists poorly. All that said, for me, this latest virtue signal to cancel Spotify highlights the inability for the left to even engage in debate any longer. The power afforded to them via Twitter lynch mobs has created a false sense of power, and they're abusing it. Rogan has a larger audience than most existing news cable shows. Rather than alienate that audience even further, why not actually engage with Rogan and debate him? He's not Goebbels. He can be reasoned with. Hell, he said he'd even vote for Bernie Sanders. The problem is the woke left have given up on winning people over and instead prefer to censor, cancel, and deplatform. Rather than cancel Rogan, why not debate him? Because the left forgot how to. P.S. The Working Group is now the second most popular New Zealand political podcast on Apple Podcasts. That was The Working Group, New Zealand's greatest weekly political podcast that isn't funded by New Zealand On Air. Our thanks to Jordan Williams, Chris Trotter, Damien Grant, and Twitter panelist Tim Selwyn. This will be uploaded on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Rova, and YouTube. We will see you Tuesday next week, 7:30 p.m. Kia ora and ka pai.
That was New Zealand's greatest weekly political podcast, The Working Group. Not 1 minute of this show was funded by New Zealand On Air. Nope, no creamy public broadcasting money for us. That was The Working Group.